The Nord Stream investigation threatens to throw that all into a tizzy, because if the Swedes actually do come out and provide the proof that everyone seems in Europe to know that the Swedes have, then all of a sudden everybody has to make some very specific decisions. And even if the Europeans don't do it, with that evidence out there, the Americans, under existing law, really don't have much of a choice. And then the Americans will have to stop trading with any country that is still trading with the Russians. And in that sort of circumstance, the entire European economic and social model goes away in a very, very short period of time. This is one of those situations where the truth will not set you free, but the truth appears to be about to come out. We're going to have a series come out this week on issues that have come out of the Ukraine war in terms of economics and strategy and everything else. We're going to start with something that the Swedish government started announcing this past Friday, when they started releasing bits and pieces from the forensic work that they have done on the Nord Stream bombing. Now, Nord Stream is a natural gas pipeline that goes under the Baltic Sea from the Russian mainland to the German coast. And when it was operating, it was providing the German economy with 40% of their natural gas usage. And without it, we are talking about the beginning of the end of Germany as an industrial power. More on that later in this series. But the new news is that the Swedes have identified the type of explosive, and they've actually gotten samples from within the pipeline, which means that they've got their nose so far deep into where the evidence would be that they know exactly who did it and how. For weeks, Sweden has been unofficially pointing the finger at Russia. Sweden has by far the most capable navy on the Baltic Sea. Sweden has by far the most advanced sonar and forensic capability in the area. And on the day that Nord Stream was bombed, they started quietly telling their European partners that it was definitely the Russians who did it. And if there's anyone in the space that has the ability to identify what actually happened, it would be Sweden. However, they have not made their findings official in any possible way until now. And the question is, what has changed? And the question is, why have they not? Unfortunately for the Europeans, the answer is pretty simple to the second questions. If they admit that the Russians are deliberately destroying critical European infrastructure, then that requires action. It, in the parlance of the United States, makes Russia a state sponsor of terrorism. And countries that kind of fall into that category, you don't trade with. And this, at least at this moment, has not been an option for the Europeans at all. Even with Nord Stream offline, Russia remains the number 3 supplier of natural gas to the continent. It is the number 1 source of the inputs that allows the Europeans to make fertilizer or to smelt aluminum. This is the raw material that goes into their steel. This is the raw material that goes into their copper. This is the raw material that goes into the European semiconductor sector. This is timber. You remove all of that from the European system, and there is no way you don't have something that is at least as bad as the 2007 to 2013 financial crisis in the Europe space. This is the kind of thing that would trigger a recession that it's very possible that the Europeans wouldn't recover from, because we are well past the point where Europe was a net consumer of goods. Europe has aged. The demographics of the continent are sharply terminal, and it has far more people in their 60s, than their 50s, than their 40s, than their 30s. So the business model for Europe today is to take raw materials from somewhere else, metabolize them into finished goods, and then export them into markets that can actually consume. Without the Russians, they lose that first step, and the entire economic model goes away. Now, the sanctions that the Europeans have put on the Russians to this point were done with this in mind. The whole idea was you phase things out over months or even years, so that the European system has a chance to adapt, to either get new suppliers or more likely go through some very significant economic restructuring, so that on the other side of this, the Europeans aren't nearly as dependent upon the imported materials no matter where they came from. The Nord Stream investigation threatens to throw that all into a tizzy, because if the Swedes actually do come out and provide the proof that everyone seems in Europe to know that the Swedes have, then all of a sudden everybody has to make some very specific decisions. And even if the Europeans don't do it, with that evidence out there, the Americans, under existing law, really don't have much of a choice. And then the Americans will have to stop trading with any country that is still trading with the Russians. And in that sort of circumstance, the entire European economic and social model goes away in a very, very short period of time. This is one of those situations where the truth will not set you free, but the truth appears to be about to come out.
Now that Nord Stream is offline, we don't know if it's going back online. The last of the four pillars that support German industrialization manufacturing are in the process of crumbling. We have become so vulnerable in the last 8 years, and everything has become so exposed. And just the bedrock that allows globalization to function, the idea that materials, energy, food, and manufactured products, intermediate products in particular, can just flow effortlessly, that's all stopped. And when I look at a country with a terminal demography who has no control over its energy or its machine inputs, it does not take much of a breath to knock that over. And I think we're going to see in very real time, in just the next 3 months, just how bad this could get for Germany very quickly. And if we've got Germany and China in a degree of economic duress at more or less the same time, but for different reasons, I don't see how we pull out of this. I would love to be wrong. I would love for there to be a transition period where we have a chance to plan. But everything has gone so far with no mitigation that I think we're well past the point of no return now. Either of these issues, from my point of view, are death blows, and having them both in roughly the same time frame is just really bad luck. I'd like to go back to something that Ian said about the Russians. I am not convinced that they're going to turn Nord Stream back on or not. I don't know. That's an internal Russian political move that it's entirely possible they haven't made the decision on. I am far more convinced that even if you put Nord Stream to the side for the moment, all of the pipes that traverse Belarus and Ukraine are ones that are probably not long for this world. It's difficult for me to see a Ukraine that believes it's losing the war to allow those to continue to operate. And I think one way or another, we're going to be seeing Russian energy fall off the market for a significant period of time. And by significant, I mean decades. The last time the Russians, for whatever reason, had to shut in their oil, it was 1992, because their exports, their raw production was fine, but their internal market collapsed, so industrial demand went away. And that meant you had wells shut in the permafrost. And when that happened, the wells become damaged, and you get frost and water expansion damage up and down the pipes and in the wellheads themselves, and eventually you have to rebuild most of the system. That took them 30 years last time. So Nord Stream is like the issue of the moment, like literally right now, this moment. But there is a half a dozen other things that are semi-related behind the scenes that are perfectly capable of making any German hope for getting back to some sort of old normal or transitioning to a new normal on a time frame they can't control. And in that sort of environment, I am very concerned about what happens with German manufacturing, and I'm even more concerned about what that means for Germany's position within the Western world. Because it feels to me like the Russians are presenting the Germans with a simple choice. We can keep the lights on for you, but that means you're out of the coalition that is supporting Ukraine, and that means the logistics that you have that is supporting Ukraine are no longer in play. Or you can do this without us, and good luck with that.